I had hoped this vacation would bring us closer, but instead, it became the breaking point of our marriage. My wife and I had been married for 10 years. In many ways, life was good. We had 2 wonderful children who were the center of our world. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted between us. Like most parents, we became entangled in the endless loop of responsibilities, school runs, work deadlines, doctor appointments, and everything else that comes with raising a family. By the time we finally got to bed, we were so exhausted that there was no energy left to talk, let alone reconnect on a deeper level. Our days felt like a never-ending cycle. I would wake up early to help get the kids ready for school, while my wife managed breakfast. After work, we divided the responsibilities of dinner, homework, and bedtime routines. Then, we would sit in front of the TV, quietly, before calling it a night. Weekends weren't much different, packed with errands and kids' activities. In the midst of all this chaos, we had lost ourselves. It hadn't always been like this. When we were dating, we could spend hours talking, laughing, and simply enjoying each other's company. But now, even when we did have free time, it felt as though we didn't know how to spend it together. Conversations had turned into discussions about bills, or who would take the kids to soccer practice. That's when I suggested a vacation, a break from a routine. It seemed like exactly what we needed. No kids, no work, just the 2 of us reconnecting like we used to. I imagined long walks on the beach, candlelit dinners, and lazy mornings where we could finally talk without interruptions. I truly believe this trip could help us remember why we fell in love in the first place. She agreed without hesitation. Maybe she felt the distance too, or maybe she was just ready for a change of scenery. Whatever the reason, we booked a tropical getaway, a chance to hit reset on our relationship. I was hopeful, even excited, that this trip could bring us closer. We arrived at the resort early in the morning, the warm sun and the sound of waves crashing against the shore welcoming us. The beach was stunning, with miles of white sand and crystal-clear water glimmering in the sunlight. For a moment, it felt like the perfect escape. Our first day was filled with simple joys. We walked hand in hand along the shoreline, letting the waves wash over our feet. She giggled when a small crab scurried past her toes, and I couldn't help but smile. It was the first time in weeks I had heard her laugh like that. At dinner, we shared a candlelit table overlooking the ocean. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as we talked about how much we needed this break. It felt good, like we were starting to reconnect. But even amid the smiles and laughter, I noticed the cracks. She spent more time on her phone than I liked, scrolling through social media or texting friends. When I asked her to join me for a sunrise walk the next morning, she shrugged it off, saying she needed to catch up on sleep. It wasn't a huge deal, but it stung. In those quiet moments, when we weren't distracted by the beauty around us, the distance between us became more obvious. I caught her staring off into the distance more than once, her face thoughtful, almost wistful. When I asked her what she was thinking about, she would brush it off, saying it was nothing important. I didn't press her, but deep down, I wondered if she was as invested in this trip as I was. Still, I held on to hope. After all, we were here to rebuild what felt broken, to remember why we had fallen in love in the first place. I told myself that these small moments of distance didn't mean anything, that they were just the byproducts of the busy lives we'd been leading. This vacation would help us find each other again, or so I hoped. I had hoped, but sometimes when you overlook the cracks, they only grow deeper. I was about to discover that no amount of sunsets or sandy shores could fix what had already started to slip away. One evening, the beach was full of life, a perfect blend of excitement and chaos. The sun was low in the sky, casting a warm orange hue across the ocean. The air buzzed with the sound of rhythmic Afro-Caribbean music blasting from the speakers, the waves crashing against the shore, and the laughter of the crowd gathered for the evening's festivities. Vendors weaved through the crowd, shouting offers for cold drinks and snacks, their colorful carts adding a burst of energy to the lively scene. The heart of it all was a makeshift stage set up near the water, surrounded by tiki torches flickering in the warm evening breeze. A lively announcer, microphone in hand, stirred up the crowd, calling for volunteers to join the eagerly awaited dance competition. A semicircle of onlookers clapped, cheered, and whistled as eager participants stepped forward to show off their moves. Amid the crowd stood my wife, her face glowing with the same excitement that had first drawn me to her years ago. She had always loved dancing, and tonight was no different. She leaned toward me, her eyes sparkling. "I want to do it," she said, almost like a child asking for permission. Before I could even respond, she was already slipping off her sandals and stepping toward the stage. At first, I didn't think much of it. She thrived in these kinds of moments, being in the spotlight, soaking in the crowd's energy. It was just her way. I stayed back, settling into my seat with a drink in hand, watching her move with eager determination toward the stage. The announcer greeted her with enthusiasm and handed her a numbered sash to tie around her waist. The crowd cheered as she climbed onto the stage. I found myself chuckling softly. This was so typical of her. She never wanted to sit still when there was a chance to have fun. Part of me admired her confidence, the way she threw herself into the moment without hesitation. The more reserved side of me, however, was content to watch from the sidelines. The announcer called for participants in the local dance competition, and my wife's face lit up with excitement. At first, I thought it was just another fun activity, a way to enjoy the vacation we had planned to use as a break from our everyday stresses. But then he appeared. Her dance partner, he was a young, charismatic local with a confident stride and a smile that could charm anyone. His athletic build and sun-kissed skin suggested he spent a lot of time in the ocean or playing sports. His movements were smooth and sure, as if he owned the dance floor. Before the music even started, he introduced himself with a bow that made my wife giggle. She took his hand, and from that moment, it felt as though I no longer existed. They began dancing, and I watched as he twirled her effortlessly, making her laugh and blush. She looked so carefree, so alive. For a moment, I thought maybe this was good for her, that she deserved to have fun. But as the dance went on, an uncomfortable knot began to form in my stomach. The way he held her waist, the way she leaned into him. It felt like too much. I stood on the sidelines, clapping awkwardly with the rest of the crowd, but it felt like I was in a different world. The cheerful music seemed almost mocking in my ears. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Each laugh, each lingering touch, felt like a dagger to my chest. Was this really just about the dance, or was it about everything we had ignored in our marriage? The distance, the silence, the way she often sought validation from others instead of from me. The applause was deafening when the music ended, but all I could hear was the silence inside me. I could feel the anger simmering inside me as they bowed and exchanged smiles. I knew I had to say something, so I approached her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we talk for a minute?" I asked. She frowned, but followed me, stepping a few paces away from the crowd. The heat of my frustration surged, and I struggled to contain it. "What are you doing out there?" I asked, my voice barely holding together. "This doesn't feel right. I think you should stop." She looked at me, her expression shifting from confusion to defiance. "What's the big deal?" she snapped. "It's just a dance. We're on vacation. Can't I have a little fun?" I tried to explain how it made me feel, but she didn't seem to care. Her tone sharpened. "We're married, but you don't own me. You can't tell me what to do." Her words hit me like a slap. I wasn't trying to control her. I just wanted her to understand how much it hurt me. But in that moment, I realized she didn't care how I felt. This wasn't about the dance. It was about how disconnected we had become, how little she seemed to value our bond. I swallowed my pride and issued a final warning. "If you go back out there and dance with him again, you won't find me here when you return." She laughed, as if I were joking. Then, without saying a word, she turned and walked back to him. The music started again, and I stood frozen, watching her smile as she continued dancing, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. As I stood there, watching her spin and laugh with a man we barely knew, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit for a long time. Our marriage had been broken for years. While she danced, I stood frozen, finally acknowledging all the times I had ignored the signs, the quiet dinners where we barely spoke, the nights spent scrolling on our phones instead of talking, the moments when she seemed distracted. And I convinced myself it was just stress or exhaustion. That dance was the last straw, a painful reminder that we had been drifting apart for far too long. I turned and walked back to the hotel. I didn't storm off. I didn't call out to her. What was the point? She didn't even notice I was gone. When I reached our room, the emptiness hit me hard. It was the kind of silence that made you feel lonelier than ever. I began packing my things, my hands moving on autopilot. I had no plan, no destination, just the overwhelming need to leave. I couldn't stand to watch her choose a fleeting moment with a stranger over the man she had promised to love forever. I booked a taxi to the airport, my fingers trembling as I confirmed the ride. Sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the suitcase I had just zipped up, it hit me. I wasn't just leaving the trip behind. I was leaving the dreams I had for us, the life we had built together, and the woman I once believed would be my forever. But in that moment, I realized I deserved more. Not perfection, not some fairy tale, but someone who chose me, someone who saw me. As I stepped into the taxi and told the driver to head to the airport, the weight of everything I was leaving behind pressed down on me. Yet, for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of clarity. Sometimes, letting go is the only way to find yourself again. When I arrived home, the silence in the house was more oppressive than ever. It wasn't the usual quiet after a long day or the stillness when the kids were at school. It was the silence of something gone, her presence, her laughter, even the faint sound of her favorite music in the background. It was all gone. I sat on the couch, my eyes fixed on the vacant space where she used to curl up with a book or scroll through her phone. Memories flooded back. I thought about how we met, the way her smile could light up any room, and how we once spent hours talking about our hopes and dreams. Back then, it felt like we were unstoppable, like nothing could tear us apart. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being us. Life got busy, work, kids, bills, and our conversations became nothing more than quick exchanges about schedules and shopping lists. The connection we once shared was buried beneath years of routine and neglect. I couldn't stop replaying the moment on the beach when she had laughed at me, her expression full of defiance. "You don't own me," she said, and it struck me like a punch to the stomach. She hadn't felt free in our marriage for a long time, and I hadn't even realized it. Maybe I had been holding on too tightly, trying to control everything when all she wanted was space to breathe. But it wasn't just her words that hurt. It was the way she turned and walked back to the dance floor, straight into the arms of a stranger who could make her laugh in ways I hadn't in years. That image burned in my mind. I realized I had been clinging to an idea of our marriage that no longer existed. The truth was, we had been broken for a while, pretending everything was fine when deep down, we both knew it wasn't. I thought about the good times, the vacations, the birthdays, the nights we stayed up talking about everything and nothing. I wanted to hold on to those memories, but they felt like sand slipping through my fingers. They no longer outweighed the cracks that had grown between us. Love alone wasn't enough to fix what had been broken. Sitting there, in the quiet of our home, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was sadness, of course, for the life we had built together that was now falling apart. But there was also relief. Relief that I no longer had to fight for something neither of us could save. It wasn't bitterness or anger, it was acceptance. A bittersweet understanding that sometimes, no matter how much history two people share, they can still drift too far apart to find their way back. I didn't know what the future held for me, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living in a marriage that felt more like a battle than a partnership. Leaving her on that beach wasn't just about the dance. It was about reclaiming my own sense of worth, my own happiness. And while the pain of letting go was real, there was also a flicker of hope that maybe this was the start of something better for both of us. After the vacation, my wife's life took a different turn. At first, she didn't seem to grasp the gravity of what had happened. When she came back home, she was met with the emptiness of a house that once represented the life we had built together. My things were gone, the rooms felt colder, and the silence rang louder than any words I could have said. She called me several times that first week, her voice a mix of confusion and irritation. She didn't seem to understand why I had left, why I couldn't just return and pretend nothing had happened. I tried to explain, tried to make her see that the issue wasn't just about the dance or her partner. It was about years of feeling invisible, about her constantly seeking validation from everyone but me, and about her refusal to see the cracks in our foundation. Over time, her calls grew less frequent. Maybe she was beginning to accept that our relationship had truly ended. She stopped asking me to come back and started focusing on her own life. But all that mattered to me now were the kids. The beach dance might have been the final straw, but in truth, our marriage had ended long before she twirled into his arms.